People who left someone at the altar. What made you do it, and what was the fallout? I was a guest on the bride's side. An acquaintance from a previous job that was kind enough to invite me. Everything was going well. She started walking down the aisle, then stopped halfway. Her father and mother came over. She whispered to them, then they all turned around and walked away. The groom immediately followed. Music kept playing, then slowly drifted away. We all just sat there in dead silence. A couple of minutes later, the father of the bride came back down the aisle and apologized, but there was going to be no wedding today. We all just got up and slowly left. There were a couple of angry family members on the groom's side, but once they talked to the father of the bride, they immediately just left. At the door, the mother of the bride shook my hand and thanked us for coming, told us that they would explain everything later, but for now we should just head home. The story is that the groom the night before ceremony confessed to the bride that he was gay. He loved her. He still wanted to marry her, provide and raise children. But he needed her to know. She couldn't let him live like that, and it wasn't fair to either of them. My mom called off a wedding to a man she was engaged to before she met my dad. It was only 1 week before. She said they got into an argument over something very trivial, something having to do with cows, but it was enough of a wake-up call for her that they were not right for each other. I know this man, and she was right not to marry him. There were people that did not get word the wedding was cancelled and showed up at the church. My wife was set to be a bridesmaid in this wedding of her college friend. It was an out-of-state wedding, and they had people coming in from all over the USA and Europe for this. Expensive sorta deal. Just my wife's dress was over $1,000 easy. 5 days before the wedding, the groom called the whole entire thing off. The reason? He was Church of Christ, and she was a Baptist, and according to him, she was in the wrong church, and since she wouldn't join his church, then he had to break it off. To the weeping bride's credit, her parents did pay back everyone, including my wife, the money for her bridesmaid dress. Not quite at the altar, but a few weeks before the wedding I left my fiancé. We had been together 4 years and the proposal was really half-assed, like he was asking, because we had been together so long, and it seemed the next thing to do, not because he actually was excited about marrying me. I had been unhappy with him for a long time, but his emotional abuse had convinced me that this was the best relationship I was ever going to find, so I stayed. My mom came to visit a month before the wedding and saw how miserable I was. She said, "You don't have to marry him if it won't make you happy." It was such a simple thing to say, but it was like someone finally gave me permission to consider my own feelings for the first time in years, and it changed my whole perspective. I called it off, moved out, got some agency over my own life, and am now living happily ever after. Edit. I realized I forgot to include the fallout op asked for. Lost money on deposits, managed to sell the dress for half of what I paid, left all the high ticket items I had purchased during the relationship behind, to avoid staying any longer to fight with him. I'd pay it all 10 times over to again feel the immediate relief I felt when I left our house for the last time, and I'd pay it 1,000 times over to keep the life I have now without him. I just found out my mom called off her wedding pretty late in the process. This was in the 1960s and the formal wedding announcement with photos had already been posted in the newspaper because that was a thing that people used to do. IG. She and her fiancé, who I'll call her Resta, had met in college, gotten pregnant, and gave the baby up for adoption. They then continued to date for another 3 years, got engaged when my mom was 21, and called off the wedding a month before the ceremony. Turns out that giving a baby up in college is a really bonding experience, and all your friends will be like, I cannot believe you guys survived that together. Y'all are such a great couple. Y'all are such role models. etc. when in actuality y'all are in freaking college and are just figuring out who you are as people, and maybe that means that y'all are not meant to be together. She says that everyone just assumed they would get married, so they were going to AskReddit, course where else do they go from the adoption? Luckily they realized they were just going along with the motions in time. My mom says it was no hard feelings between her and Steve, that they meet up every 3 to 5 years, just to see what turns up with the other, and she has no regrets. Unlike her actual marriage to my father, but hey, she got me out of that deal, so it wasn't at all bad. Meanwhile, I just found out / met my 54-year-old sibling for the first time that I had not known about. My mom's not sick, but she is getting older, and I guess she felt she needed to get this off her chest and tell me before it was too late. Turns out my secret sister is a freaking CrossFit trainer with arms like cannons, so I have no genetic excuse for not being able to do a pull-up. Also, my mom is cool as crap, and I think this whole story makes her even cooler. Not entirely on message, but we almost called off our wedding the day before. Her dad had a massive heart attack and almost died 2 days beforehand. He had surgery, died 2 or 3 times during it. We got like 7 hours of sleep over 2 nights, 3 days. He was in the ICU up until the ceremony. He then showed up and walked her down the aisle with an automatic defibrillator vest, then sat in a wheelchair, thank God. My emotions were all over the place. I don't know how she kept it together, lol. Not quite at the altar, but an ex-girlfriend was at a bachelorette party at a seedy male strip club. She came home from the party and said, well, the wedding is off. She said the bride was getting the usual treatment, sitting in a chair with strippers gyrating around her, whipping dongs around, and then one put whipped cream on his C***ck and invited her to lick it off, which she did with her tonsils until the stripper shoots his load all over the front of her I'm the bride t-shirt. About this moment, the bride kind of comes to her senses, looks around and sees like 20 of her friends pointing cell phones at her, recording and taking photos, and starts freaking out. My girlfriend says she started screaming at everyone, you better delete that crap, and generally having a full rage meltdown, which is apparently tough to take seriously when you're basted in stripages. This tale of modern romance closes very shortly later with the bride's phone ringing a call from her fiancé, who has already received photos from her friends of his bride to be with a C***ck stuffed in her mouth. As someone who married someone who should have left me standing at the altar instead of dragging a lie on for another 10 years with all the nasty consequences, I applaud you for doing right thing before the ring. My buddy was engaged to be married. Everything was going great up until about 2 months before the wedding, when the bride freaked out about something very minor during a family vacation and stopped speaking to him. They would text once a day so the other knew they were okay. They would say I love you, and she would assure him she still wanted to get married. 1 month before the wedding she called it off. They still hadn't talked except for the texts. So he called all his people and told them the wedding was off. Only he forgot about one of his friends who had been on his fiance's list, as he was a mutual friend. Mutual friend still went to the wedding, where he found a wedding. The woman had been seeing someone on the side, still went through with the wedding, but to a different guy, all on my friend's dime. He had left her in charge on cancelling everything. As someone who was left at the altar, that sucked balls. I was dating this girl for 5 years. I popped the question and she happily agreed. 10 months in, and the day had come. Everything was fine until that question from the padre. I didn't notice at first, but someone walked as a guest to watch, and she literally changed her tone. Her demeanor instantly changed. So when the padre asked the question, she said aloud no, and she walked away with someone. As it turns out, she was cheating on me with some dude for 1 year. Apparently that dude knew about our wedding and walked in to scoop her out. I was left with severe anger, not even a shred of sadness, just extremely pissed. I screamed at her family and mindstugged for the church and let me be. Soon after, the sadness came in, but I got over here surprisingly quick. Took me 4 months, which was good, because I found out the dude was using her hard-earned savings for his meth addiction. Last thing I heard from her, she is living in a homeless shelter. Thank God I had no kids with that biatch. I'm happily married to someone else now with kids. I didn't leave her at the altar. I was the one that was left. It happened not the day of the wedding, but just a couple days before it, when literally guests from all over the country had already arrived, and the last of the $40k had been spent on everything wedding related. It was the devastatingly worst day of my life. She didn't even tell me in person. She called me and told me, while I was at work, that we were not getting married. I was a complete mess. Called my brother to ask him if he would notify everyone. I drove straight to my parents' house and locked myself in the guest room for a week. Never knew so much liquid could come out of someone's face for such a long period of time, lol. It's been a journey, but I'm better off for it today. It definitely still hurts, but at least there is some light in my life now. There is a bit of a backstory, but basically she deeply betrayed my trust about a year before the wedding, and from that day forward my confidence fell, and it was apparent I didn't feel like an equal in the relationship. So, she essentially didn't feel as doted upon, or loved as she once was, which is true. Anyway, yay, the saying is true. When you hit rock bottom, the only way out is up. Leading up to our wedding, my wife and I started having more stresses as normal. Things weren't going well with her mother, who would complain about not being included and then not show up, or show up late, when we tried to include her in planning activities. When my wife's dress came in, she had to go to get it fitted, and at the same time we had to go take care of something with the florist. So we had asked my future mill to take care of the florist, while I took my wife to the dress shop. We arrived at the dress shop and everything was going well, but then my mill backed out at the last minute. So I had to go take care of the florist. I guess that meant that I left my wife at the altar. Not my story but my ex. This wasn't completely at the altar, but the whole situation was crappy. My ex was once engaged to this really beautiful and independent woman. On hindsight I think he was emasculated by it. Ex was raised in an emotionally abusive home where he got used to his dad's bad habits as the norm. I don't know the woman's side of the story, but from context from my ex pretty much played mama's boy and never really defended his fiancée from his mom who treated her indifferently. He also had high demands for his GF before she is worthy or marrying him. He also had to redo his proposal back. He wasn't satisfied with how she reacted to the first one. On top of that, during a wedding expo where his GF won some wedding package and was asked to come on stage, like any excited bride-to-be, she happy jumped on stage to accept the prize. This irritated my ex, who said her actions were selfish because she didn't take him with her to the stage and used this to justify his next actions. He cheated on her 2 months before the wedding when all the venues and invitations were booked and sent out. Caused a huge deal of embarrassment to his poor over-religious mom. And it gets better. Hell hath no fury like a bride scorned, and him and the new fling bumped into the now ex-fiancée at the mall a few weeks before the supposed wedding. The incident snapped his ex-fiancée, and she beat up the new girl in public, who BTW was unaware she was girl #2. Where was my ex in all of this? He abandoned his new GF and ran away. He's proud of this fact, BTW. Ending for all, my ex dated the new girl actually 4 years and dangled the promise of marriage before he too left her and cheated on her. I was the replacement and I was young and naive back then. I broke up with him after 2ish years together. His ex-fiancée is doing much better professionally, travels the world and seems happy. He tends to stalk her social media in hopes she misses him. My ex considers her as the one that got away. The new girl, bless her heart, she's a nice girl, but was in love with the wrong guy. She finally accepted the breakup and is moving on with her life. Him, sadly the bipolar part of his genetics is acting up. He is single, has no savings, went from job to job, and got scammed several times by friends and fake dating networks. Well, I'd already taken the communion, so I figured I'd go sit down, but the priest had to stay up there and feed a few more people. Altar.